How did we get started testing? All right, so here's the origin story. Me and this guy, Ian, we used to work at this testing lab in Berkeley, California called Steep Hill Labs. And one day, we're going to get lunch. We're getting sandwiches at this joint we usually get sandwiches at, called the Nordic House. And Ian says to me, yo, there's this meeting coming up. There's this meeting where they're going to talk about decriminalized nature, and they're going to break down what it means that mushrooms just got decriminalized. This was back in 2019, and there was this meeting with the people who organized Decriminalized Nature, and they were going to talk about what is happening in the year since they decriminalized and what we could do moving forward. So I'm like, nah, I don't know if I really even want to go, but I do want to find out what's going on in these mushrooms. Fuck it, let's check it out. Later I found out that Ian actually told me that it was like a scholarship opportunity for us to go, but he ended up paying some bread. Oh, the sound is no good. Damn. No. Let's see. If I remove this, maybe this will help the situation. Ugh. Troubleshooting, y'all. Troubleshooting. Bear with me. First time doing this. Maybe I need a microphone for this one too, but we shall see. Bloop. Alright, is this any better? Any better on the audio? Or is the audio still whack? Somebody in the comments let me know if the audio is still whack. Is it better or is it still whack? It's better. Fucking sick. Let's go. Alright. Back to it. So, Ian hits me up. Was like, yo, let's go to this Decrim Nature meeting. Didn't know what that was, but I was like, fuck it, let's go. We're scientists. I bet there's some people there who would love to find out what's going on in these mushrooms. We're working at a cannabis lab at the time, and so I was like, fuck it. We know how to find out what the potency is of this cannabis flower, of this other entheogenic matrix. Why don't we go and see if the people who are fucking with mushrooms are going to do the same thing. So we go. That meeting, I'm outside, I'm networking, I'm chopping it up, I'm smoking my blunt, doing my thing. And actually, funny story, that was the same night I met Ajgad. So anybody from Oakland, if you know Ajgad, we actually met outside of the Source Chiropractic that fateful night in August of 2019. Or September, or whatever the fuck it was. So I'm going in, we're about to start the conversation, and I sit down, and this dude walks up to me, and he's like, yo, is anybody sitting there? And I'm like, no, feel free, sit down. And so I start telling him about this church. I was like, bro, I don't know if you know this, but there's this church down the block where you can go in there. Not only can you buy weed, you can buy fucking mushrooms over the counter in Oakland. Now, this was 2019. I was tripping. I had just moved from Wisconsin. And the guy sitting next to me was this dude named Reggie. Lo and behold, I don't see this man again until we end up in Jamaica, where we start talking to ministers of agriculture and fishery or whatever about how we were going to utilize the legislative circumstance in Jamaica. There basically was no rules on mushrooms, so people were allowed to do what they want. These retreats were getting started, the entire talk of like cultivation and all this was going on, and so we're like, yeah, we could do this. We could build a company. We could start testing these. We even set up meetings with people in the University of the West Indies, and it was a really fascinating first trip. And then when we get back from Jamaica, long story less long, we actually went through a couple different iterations of our company before it became the Hyphae Labs, like what we were doing. Before any testing began, we had to go through a whole bunch of shit, get an instrument, work with this group. Man, it was a lot of things before we actually started the first test. But then in 2020, it might have even been 2021, I think it was 2020, Ian drops the first set of results. there's like 10 people. Now, Reggie had been talking to me for a minute, like, yo, how do we get this test? Like, how do we figure this out? How are we going to test these mushrooms? We just want to find a way to, like, go to the people at these sessions, go to the growers and the distributors and find out, like, yo, how do we help you find out what's going on in your mushrooms? But Reggie hits me up and he's like, look, we're just doing this the first time. What if someone wants to poke holes in our analysis? Like, what are we going to do if what we say we're doing isn't exactly what we think it is? This was 3-4 years ago, right? And I said to him, I was like, well, this is the first testing of its kind. When is the last time, like me and Ian have been looking through research papers, when's the last time someone had gathered all of these mushrooms together and analyzed them at the same time? During police studies, you know, they would take confiscated whatever from arrests and they would do those analysis, but like the data was few and far between. And so we said, well, shit, if we do this, this is a comparative analysis, regardless of like how accurate we are with the potency on the first time around. What is undoubtedly true is, comparatively speaking to each other, what we can say is this one is the hitter, this one is not. Now that's how we started. The conversation was just like, whose shit is hitting the strongest? Let's find out. But then that's when we answered the second question. How did the cannabis industry, how did our experience in the cannabis industry impact what became the Hyphae labs? So one of the things that we looked at was, what were the pitfalls in cannabis? The first thing that we noticed was that high potency values led to diminishing genetics. Everybody seeking these high THC values were growing OG, Kush, and runts, and that's it. Any variation of this, Girl Scout cookies, whatever, there's really just like 2 or 3 lineages that all of these flowers that everybody started growing came from. What is the next thing that we saw? Terpenes and secondary cannabinoids sought to address the fact that like everybody was just going for THC numbers. Like, what can we do? So we started talking about terpenes and secondary cannabinoids, tetrahydrocannabivarinol, or THCV, or CBG, or CB, whatever. But the truth was, this was a little bit too late. And so when we looked at who was vested in making cannabis labs even work, East Coast, venture capitals, people who were really just trying to pump out numbers and inflate the value of the cannabis industry rather than understanding what was going on. And so what we realized is, by just chasing potency numbers, we actually lost the wide variety of genetics that used to exist within THC, within this cannabis and THC producing plant. I remember when I was 16 and learning how to start smoking, we had Blue Dream and Durban Poison and OG Kush, and we had the purple and we had the green crack and whatever. There was this variety of different things that, man, that was exciting. We got to smoke this shit and I was like, oh, this was different. This one had the orange hairs, this, that, and the third. Come out to California, then all of a sudden people start growing only to get this one certain look, this one certain smell, and we lose all of the genetic diversity because people are chasing these numbers. And then when you pile that in with who's the people vested in these labs, they're vested in putting out higher potency numbers. And so if they're pushing out higher potency numbers, you get a situation where now people are talking about 30-40% weed, when logically that doesn't even make any sense. And so Ian and I and Reggie, we start talking about like how, and Emily as well, like there's a few people that you might not see behind the scenes. Emily's going to be at the Hyphae Cup this weekend. Shout out Emily. She's going to help us break down all of the data that we've gotten so far. And so what we realized was that people vested in making these labs succeed were really vested in putting out higher potency numbers, which led to like lax analysis, fucked up regulations, and Ian and I left the cannabis industry, entered into the mushroom space, and thought, how do we change the conversation? So Ian's got this really good story that he tells about him and the homie Ayize. Shout out A Table of Our Own, Ayize, Jama Everett, amazing author, among many other things, community organizer. And he's having a conversation with him about rappers. And there was this list that came out that was like the rappers in hip-hop from the most lyrical diversity to the least lyrical diversity, and it was established like that. And someone was so impressed by that list that they copied it. But what they did was they had this interesting little shift where they put it vertically instead of horizontally. And immediately the author of that had to come back at them and be like, yo, don't get me shot. Because all of a sudden, if you change the orientation of that list, instead of, oh, this rapper being the most lyrically diverse and this rapper being the least lyrically diverse, now you have a conversation where people are like, yo, this guy's the best and this guy's the weakest. And when you start having conversations like that, it shifts the focus of like, wait, all of these rappers have different value. You know, I'm not always trying to listen to Nas, and I'm not always trying to listen to Lil Nas X. Not that I really listen to him that much, but you get what I'm saying. There's like levels to this shit. Who am I trying to listen to? Big Pun, or am I trying to listen to Lil Wayne? Am I listening to Common, or am I listening to Lupe? There's a different type of flow and a different type of lyricism that exists. And so framing them as like who has the most lyrical diversity as the best, that's where they got it fucked up. And so Ian comes up with this thing called the Hyphae spectrum, where instead of looking at this as a horizontal list, we start looking at it as an array, as a spectrum of, this is really good for this application, this is really good for this one. If levels to this shit, you get it. If you're trying to go see God, you don't want to eat a golden teacher. You're gonna need to eat so fucking many golden teachers if you want to go to outer space. Simultaneously, like, if you're trying to chill and have a microdose, for example, I was trying to like microdose on a chocolate today. I had a little piece of it, but it was way too strong of a chocolate. That micro was not a micro. That shit was hitting. I was fucking like, damn, there's like a gram of mushrooms, and I thought I was taking a low dose. And so understanding that is how we develop the Hyphae spectrum, to have things like a recreational dose, what is good for microdosing, what is good for therapeutic reasons, and what is good for spiritual exploration. Another thing that we've done with the Hyphae cup and how cannabis has informed us is by expanding the tryptamine offering at an early point in the game. Like, sure, we were looking for psilocin and psilocybin off rip, but immediately we were looking for things like norpsilocin, norbaeocystin, baeocystin, aruginacin, because by introducing the conversation of how there are many different alkaloids that impact the chemical analysis, we could look at it in the same way as like with cannabis. It took a long time before people started saying, hey, pay attention to the terpenes, hey, pay attention to the cannabinoids. If we started it off from the beginning, then, you know, the idea is people will start to look at these mushrooms more as like a profile. Oh, this one has a high level of baeocystin, and that's why it's really good for this application. Or this one has a high level of aruginacin, and so people tend to fall asleep, or whatever the application might be. This is data that we're going to have to collect before we start making these kind of assessments. And then lastly, one of the things that we're trying to do that completely got missed by the cannabis space is establish a dose of what is a mushroom trip, or what is a mushroom dose. There is a microdose, and it's basically 1 milligram. Like 1 milligram of psilocybin equivalent is basically a microdose. Once you get to around 20 milligrams of psilocybin, that's equivalent to around what people would normally say is an eighth of mushrooms. And so you'll start to feel the effects at a visual distortion level somewhere around 10 milligrams. And once you get to that 20 milligrams, that's that eighth trip. That's that full dose that people are talking about. And as we move the conversation in that direction, what we can do is now start to say, hey, this is what a glass of beer worth of this substance looks like versus a glass of grain alcohol versus a glass of wine. You know, what we're trying to establish is maybe golden teachers are really good beer types of mushrooms, whereas the apes might be the shot, that might be the Everclear, that might be the gin. You know, and if you want the wine one, that might be the hillbilly, the something in between. And so as we're establishing that, an eighth ain't always an eighth, man. That's truly the facts. And so how we shape the conversation moving forward is understanding that the responsibility lies on us to reflect. The responsibility lies on us to look at the data of what we've learned not only in the cannabis space, but what we've learned in the mushroom space, so that we can move this forward in a much more positive direction. We need to look at what were the incentives that drove the lack of diversity in cannabis. Why was it that people were shooting for such high potency values? Well, it was because there's a productizing market, and if you can sell your pounds for this much more because it has this higher percentage, well, then there's a tangible dollar value associated with that. But if we can get to a point where we look at these things more like breeds, more like there's a perfect hillbilly, and it's not the strongest hillbilly. It's the one that does the thing that we're looking for. There's a perfect golden teacher, and it's not the weakest golden teacher. It's the golden teacher that gives us the effect that we're looking for. And simultaneously, there's an enigma that is the best enigma, and it's not necessarily the enigma that you only need to eat 0.1 of to go explore different geometric patterns within the universal fractals. Understanding this is what's going to help us move forward. And so the questions we need to ask is, how do we give respect to each of these different genetics? The way that I think that we can do that is by truly looking at the data, not with the intention of trying to get somewhere specific, but by doing what we're already doing, growing the mushrooms, and observing them to understand what they are and what we can learn from them. And so what y'all are going to see, by the way, this is pretty much the end of my rant. I got 16 minutes in. Feel good enough with the content for that. But what I'm telling you now is that at the Hyphae Cup this weekend, what we're going to be doing is breaking down not only all of the analysis that we've done this year, but all of the analysis that we've done over the past 4 years. And we're not just looking at our data. We're going to be looking at the data of the Colorado Cup that just happened this summer. We're going to be looking at Magic Myco's data. These are publicly available data online. We're going to be looking at Yoshi's data up in the Pacific Northwest. The idea that, look, it's a marketing thing. Yo, when we say shit like this is the only cup that matters, the reason we say that is because, first off, you got to talk your shit. If you don't represent your stuff, who the fuck else is going to represent your shit? But second of all, we're breaking down everybody's data. The reason this is the cup that matters is because we're breaking down the data of everybody's science across the board. And by looking at this, we're going to have an N of greater than 30, which is what you need for statistical significance. We have a sample set of 500 from one group, over 500 from another group, around 200 from another group, around 100 from another group. Collectively, we have over 1,000 samples that we can look at to get insightful data. And if only there was chemists or scientists who have been doing this, analyzing data for years, who can take large data sets and make meaningful information about it. If only there was people. Oh yeah, that's right. This is literally our day job. This is what we've been doing far before mushrooms. And so the ability for us to take this data, package it into a meaningful and digestible bit of information is what you're going to be getting at the Hyphae Cup, where you're going to find out what is a strain, what we're going to be looking at in the industry moving forward, and how it is we can avoid the pitfalls of cannabis that led to only 2 or 3 different strains that all taste the same and don't even get you high anymore. Anyways, I'm stopping the recording, but appreciate y'all tuning in. Stay blessed. If y'all want to hang out for a little bit and chat, we can, but I'm going to turn off this recording. And I'm